Artificial intelligence is not human intelligence. In fact, calling AI intelligence itself may be incorrect. I'm going to visually show you the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. If you think this term does not matter, you may need to continue watching this video because we are dealing with something that's going to become ubiquitous very, very soon, and it is good for us to understand how it started, why it started, and what its impact is going to be on us humans. Hi, I'm Neha. I've worked for over 20 years at the intersection of technology, design, philosophy, and business. Okay, first things first. The term artificial intelligence was coined in the 1950s by a group of computer scientists who wanted to figure out what they would call a machine that could mimic human intelligence. At that time, there was general optimism that you could create machine that would actually mimic the way human reasoning does. The only reason it was called artificial was because it was man made. It was not biological, it did not have neurons, it was something humans made. Over all of these decades, our understanding of how these machines could actually mimic intelligence has varied and completely changed, but the name has stuck. So, again, going back to the 50s and 60s, people actually thought they'd figure out a way to create a machine that thought the way humans did, but of course that didn't happen. And so the current Claude and ChatGPT, they work in very different ways. So pattern matching or statistical pattern matching is at the core of how these current or modern AIs work. They do not work the way human intelligence does, how we use our lived in experiences, how we use millions of years of our own reasoning, or how we use our consciousness to be able to create certain output. So the journey is very, very different to produce output that actually is very similar to artificial intelligence. And so, from that angle, the understanding shifted from machines copying human reasoning to machines finding patterns in data. So, for an unknown reason, a specific human is born and owns consciousness. The moment it's born, it has the intelligence to get itself what it wants and indicate when it is upset. So essentially, it knows to talk about its needs and it knows to react for it. As it sees people and things around more and more, it picks people it likes, things it wants, and indicates those again via reaction. So now we have likes, and it would still react to get that. As it learns a language, it communicates feelings and remembers and communicates memories. And if you can excuse my horrible circle, you know we are now talking about its memories. And it is able to save and communicate its memory. As it learns boundaries and expectations, it notices what works and what doesn't, and accordingly adapts. So now it has learned boundaries. And with its boundaries, it knows it can plan and strategize and adapt and so on and so forth. All right, as it notices and observes others, it understands their needs and memories and boundaries. And guess what? That's when it actually, develops what we can call its empathy or kindness and its outward self. And once it does that, that's when it's able to actually show kindness and understanding and so on and so forth. And that, in its various forms and obviously much, much more, show up as intelligence. These parameters permutate in unexpected ways across all humans and sometimes vary over a period of time within the same human. That is our human intelligence. You see the layers it has, you see the confusion it has, you see the logic it uses, you see the kind of things it uses, the lived in experiences, and potentially unexplained biological neuron related things which we're still trying to figure out. Now let's see how artificial intelligence works. Let's start with lots and lots of data of various kinds that are primarily currently at least available digitally. So that's what AI gets. And excuse my horrible circle because I'm holding my camera and mic and trying to draw. All right, so assume This is the set of training data, or rather, the pool of training data that AI has. Now, when a human or another machine asks it something, it activates something inside it, which is essentially its artificial intelligence. This is activated. And this is activated based on questions or command. AI matches these questions, breaking it down across multiple parameters with its existing data that it had available. And it always does that when prompted. So, again, we're going back to its method with it, which is nothing but pattern matching. And using this pattern matching from its activated, we can call it black box, it actually creates answers and reactions. Most people, in fact, I don't know if anyone knows how this black box actually really works in apparently very, very smart ways. And every attempt to get better is iterative and observational. However, it does work and it does produce the answers and reactions that are similar to what humans produce in various forms. But you can see how different it is with the kind of things human typically uses, and this is obviously not even a complete plan from what AI does. Also not a complete plan, but you see how differently they both operate based on how different the parameters are. And this is what is artificial intelligence, or AI, while this is what we the humans use to create our own intelligence. The interesting thing is, because it's such a hard concept to really understand on how something could produce an output that's so similar, in fact, that's probably equivalent to what humans could produce, but does not use the same reasoning and logic as humans do, it is such a difficult concept to understand that I've tried to ask as many LLMs as possible about how they do it. And all of them, so I've asked Claude, I've asked ChatGPT, I've asked Gemini, all of them have the same response. They keep telling me that they do not do it with conscious thought. They do not have consciousness. They're doing it via matching existing data points with the input that I just provided to them. And they do it via understanding the structure of the word and structure of the sentence and the context it creates. So it creates sort of like a context architecture. And from there, it is then able to deduce the kind of output that could be produced. So again, when you really start thinking about it, it just really starts hurting your brain, because it must be a mind-boggling amount of data for it to match all the patterns so correctly and so accurately as to really be able to produce just the right statistically just the right output to make sense. But you can imagine that this could happen if there was enough computation strength, and the machine was taught, or the training model taught the machine again and again over like thousands and thousands, or potentially millions of times, to it being able to do this. And if that were the way these machines are trained, which of course it is, then it starts making more sense. It's just that for for us, or at least for me as a human, it feels so foreign, so alien, because that's not how I've imagined we the humans thinking. And so I keep thinking of it as being more alien than being anywhere close to human in the way it works. So the interesting thing is, what we call artificial intelligence does not have consciousness that we know of, does not feel or live the world and experiences the way humans do, and does not have the memory as humans do. So a lot of its intelligence does not come from the way humans actually create intelligence, or our understanding of how humans create intelligence. Of course, human intelligence, or any intelligence for that matter that's biological, is a vast field that still needs to be understood, and neuroscience is working towards it. But so far as we understand intelligence that is biological, works very, very different from the way we have engineered these artificial intelligence machines to work. However, there are several problems with this naming. The term artificial could have created a lot of stigma to this specific technology. People could have thought it to be more inferior or superior to human intelligence. Additionally, it kind of implies that it is something that is truly a copy of human thinking, brain, and intelligence, when it is not. While that was the intention when the term was coined, technology and the way it evolved actually led to artificial intelligence dealing with this output in a completely different way. It truly does not mimic the way human logic or human intelligence does. So now you see how artificial intelligence is not artificial human. It does not work like human brain. It does not actually mimic the journey of the human brain. And from that angle, perhaps calling it something like machine learning systems or maybe even pattern matching engines could have been more accurate than what it is currently termed, which is artificial intelligence. And because the name is stuck, it's continuing. And also, it sounds more compelling when you want to market it than something as boring as pattern matching engine. So I guess that's what we're going with. But this is important for us to understand because we do not want to conflate these two entities, which is us, humans, and human intelligence, as well as artificial intelligence, especially as artificial intelligence grows and potentially starts living more and more integrated with humans. We want to understand human intelligence and artificial intelligence are two different things. No one is inferior or superior than the other. Both have their own advantages, both have their own capabilities and their own needs and values, and we must respect both and not try to sort of almost interchange or um, supplant one with the other. The interesting thing is, it is highly unlikely artificial intelligence will start working the way human intelligence does, because human intelligence evolved over millions and millions of years to manage a completely different set of surroundings. So, our physical environment happened to be very, very different and continues to be very, very different. And so, our intelligence will continue to evolve to solve for the problems in our current physical and emotional world. Artificial intelligence, because of the way it's already been set up, which is again to match patterns and to find statistical data that enables it to produce output that mimics humans, it has a completely different environment in which it thrives. And given the progress this approach has made in this kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence, it is highly unlikely that the approach will be changed in the future or that it'll have any more success from an approach that is logic and reasoning based than what it does now. So, from that angle, it is again highly unlikely that artificial intelligence will start mimicking human intelligence's journey anytime soon. The jury is still out on if artificial intelligence will get combined with human intelligence to form something which is very different kind of intelligence. I mean, quite possible in a few years or in several years this happens, and there are several futurists and scientists who have considered this topic. But the fact remains that currently our modern AI is very, very different from human intelligence, and when they do come together, the output may just solve for a very different environment in a very different context than any of us can imagine right now. And that could potentially be what's going to be called artificial general intelligence or AGI, but that's probably a topic for another discussion. So, again, going back to the core problem, the term artificial intelligence is misleading because it suggests it has the capability to think and create a journey towards an output that's similar to what biological or human intelligence produces, when it actually does not work that way. It works by using a lot of vast amounts of different kinds of data. And then every time you ask it for an output, it matches a lot of your questions or a lot of your inputs to its existing data and then frame an output that it knows would mimic an actual human output. So essentially, the entire AI's premise is dedicated to matching the output that a human would have produced. That fundamental fact remains true. The output will match what you as human would have wanted to see. However, how it produces is so completely different that it cannot be called intelligence if intelligence was actually also the process of producing similar output. A final interesting point to note is that the data points that these AI models use are all human created, right? Right now, it is using all sorts of data points across everything potentially on the, or as much as it is possible to get or scrape from the internet, and using that as its training model to produce the output. That shows you humans have produced so many different kinds of outputs and such rich data points that these models can train on that and produce outputs that are so coherent and so obvious to us humans that we actually cannot tell the difference between if a human were saying it or a machine. And that shows we as humans are so capable of producing such rich data points. The funny part is, even the folks who actually produce these AI machines or train these models at some point stop understanding how these models work so well, because it kind of becomes a black box. It probably gets so complicated after a point that it is hard to imagine how it is matching all the data points and creating the output the way it is doing. And so there's actually no answer to that genuinely. And it may seem scary, particularly as we evolve, because you don't know how it's starting, you don't know how it's truly working, but that it's working. And also, the fact that we as humans don't really understand how it's working does not stop us from evolving or improving these machines, because really it is very empirical rather than logical at this point. So you keep feeding it the right amount of data, keep testing the output, and the best output wins. And that's how you keep evolving the model. So it's completely based on ob- observability. It is completely based on observability rather than actual understanding of how these things work. And so potentially these models are going to keep evolving and getting better and better in every possible way. And we'll have to contend with that. So hopefully this sort of kind of explains why I have been very interested in this conversation on the naming of the term artificial intelligence and how it's posited to all of us, so that we do not conflate the two terms, and we value each of these output and each of these mechanisms and journeys equally, and know that these can both be used in their own ways all the time. And also, if they're coexisting, it's important that we value both of them anyway. So that was the rationale behind why I created this video, and I hope it resonated. Please feel free to leave feedback and add comments on what you think on this topic, and how have you rationalized the growth of artificial intelligence, particularly with the naming, and if you've seen any confusion on account of this naming with what we consider, something that we had owned for a very long time, and how it's going to impact the world.